What's up, y'all? It's your boy Charles, checking in. I want to do a reaction to this book called Gangsters of Harlem. Um, I have did one before, but I also want to do another one. Let's go ahead and check it out. Hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to Charles and His Word. Thank y'all for watching. I'm gonna come back with my reaction. Let's get into it.
The fallen angel was Joe Gallo, a wiry, fair-haired gangster with a short fuse. At age 21, Gallo was arrested for burglary. His behavior at his trial was so weird that the court sent him to a hospital for a mental examination. The conclusion of the psychiatrist who examined him was unanimous. Joe Gallo is insane. The nickname Crazy Joe stuck. Bob Dylan would later compose a song about the growing legend of Crazy Joe Gallo. Gallo had been convicted on conspiracy and extortion charges in 1961 and was serving 7.5 to 14.5 years in jail. Gallo and his two brothers, Larry and Albert, ran a gang that was largely responsible for the bloody Mafia war then raging in Brooklyn. What got Crazy Joe put away for a long stretch, though, was his illegal bullying of Local 226, the automatic coin and amusement machines employees union, which represented workers who serviced jukeboxes, pinball, and other coin-operated machines. Gallo's gang demanded that the union workers pay an initiation fee and monthly dues for the right to inspect the machines. At a congressional hearing, one worker described what happened when he didn't cooperate. "They came out with steel bars and split my skull open, and I was taken to the hospital." Like Barnes, Gallo was a paradox. He could be a ruthless killer, but often there was lucidity to his madness, and he would astonish his associates with his erudition, often striking up a conversation about Franz Kafka, Honoré de Balzac, Jean-Paul Sartre, or some other great writer. The evidence of his punk past, to the contrary, Barnes was highly intelligent, a thinker who, when not involved in criminal business, liked to read everything from thick biographies of history's great leaders to dense constitutional law texts. Barnes and Gallo hit it off and began engaging in long discussions to whittle their time away. Given Gallo's experience in the mob, Barnes knew he could learn a lot, especially about how to operate a drug trafficking enterprise. Soon, the monologues drifted toward discussions about organizing the black gangsters in Harlem into a syndicate that could rival the Italian-American mob. Some sources say Gallo was ahead of his time, meaning that during an age of rigid segregation, he was not afraid to have blacks join his gangs, much to the chagrin of his racist Mafia cohorts. One police intelligence officer told the press in 1975 that, "From what we had been able to determine, he, Gallo, was one hell of a teacher. He schooled a lot of blacks in Attica, Sing Sing, and Greenhaven. He taught them how to move in traditional Mafia territory. And they did." Donald Goddard, the author of Joey, a biography of Joe Gallo, offers a different take. Gallo didn't like blacks, Goddard writes, and further, he was a terribly prejudiced guy. Goddard saw Gallo as a white equivalent of Malcolm X, who was rising above prejudices, just as Malcolm X rose above his own prejudices. It is wrong to suggest the Italian-American mobster and the revered black Muslim were brothers under the skin. Still, it is clear that Gallo had to make a move for the sake of his survival. In reality, he had burned all of his bridges to the Italian-American Mafia. The bloody war that Gallo had instigated prior to his arrest was actually a rebellion against powerful godfather Joe Profaci. The brash Gallo kidnapped several members of Profaci's family, demanding a bigger share of the profits. By the time Gallo went to prison, 12 mobsters were dead as a result of the gang war. As mob historians suggest, jail probably saved Joey Gallo's life. He also confessed to sources on the outside that he felt white prisoners at Greenhaven were out to kill him, So, caged and cornered, the only way Gallo could survive was through an alliance with black prisoners.
Easier to
Barnes
say.
liked the idea of an all-black syndicate with him in charge, and mob-wise Joey Gallo playing a seminal role behind the scenes. He knew that crime was an equal opportunity employer in poverty-plagued Harlem. Hundreds of hungry gangsters could be mobilized into a strong force that could be used to overwhelm the Italians. Once the Black Syndicate controlled New York City, the Alliance could easily organize a national syndicate. Barnes and Gallo struck a deal, and to further the plan, Gallo arranged for his lawyer to work on Barnes's appeal. Barnes's 25-year sentence was overturned on a technicality, and he was released from prison in 1969. Soon after his release, Barnes called a meeting of Harlem's top gangsters at a bar at 125th Street and 8th Avenue in Harlem. Barnes used all his charisma and powers of persuasion to convince his fellow mobsters that it was time they stopped playing a subservient role to their white counterparts. The brothers worked the streets and risked jail, but the Italians hauled in the cash, Barnes reminded his associates. Coming into the meeting, Barnes had the support of two other mobsters, Sonny Woods and Hollywood Harold Munger. But he couldn't convince anybody else, and his plan was defeated by a vote of 7-3. Organized crime historian William Kleinknecht notes in his book, The New Ethnic Mobs, that the meeting was the closest the nation had ever come to having a true black mafia. Queenie St. Clair had organized the 40 Thieves in the 1930s, but its sphere of activity was limited to Harlem. Frank Matthews had arranged a meeting of top black gangsters from around the country, but it was not focused on organizing a national commission. Undeterred by the vote, Barnes decided he would achieve his ambitions in the drug trade on his own. Many of his workers had stayed on the payroll while he was in prison, and he moved to reactivate his organization. Barnes liked the Italian-American Mafia model in which business is controlled by a ruling council. He knew the importance of strategic alliances to diminish violence and maximize profits. A council could be used to carve up territory and to negate internecine squabbles that could erupt into gang warfare. The future Mr. Untouchable organized his own council consisting of 7 members, each of whom controlled a dozen mid-level distributors, who in turn supplied up to 40 street-level retailers. The council set up separate departments to handle security and enforcement, financial services, legal services, and money laundering. The 7 mobsters also pooled their money to buy multi-kilo loads of heroin and worked out a drug distribution plan so they would have a consistent and steady supply. The rules of the council were strict. To be a council member, one had to take an oath of brotherhood. A godfather might be on the council, but miss a meeting, and he was fined $1,000. No messing in another council member's territory without his permission, and under no circumstances could he mess with another member's wife or women. Matthew Madonna, now out of prison, became Barnes's most trusted lieutenant. In the early 1970s, Barnes and Madonna worked out an ingenious distribution system to exchange drugs and cash, which allowed them to be in public together without either having drugs or cash on them. Once a month, the two met on a Manhattan street corner, where Barnes would give Madonna the keys to a car parked in a nearby city parking lot. The car's trunk was loaded with heroin. 2 days later, Barnes would park the car in another parking lot, emptied of heroin, but filled with cash. Barnes would then meet Madonna on another street corner and give his trusted associate the keys. The authorities never figured out the scheme until Barnes told them about it years later. Barnes eventually controlled heroin sale and manufacture throughout New York State into Pennsylvania and as far north as Canada and west as Arizona. Barnes was part of a trend in which African American and Hispanic drug trafficking groups began taking over from long-entrenched Italian American organizations, explained Robert Nieves, a retired DEA agent who investigated Nicky Barnes in the 1970s as part of a special DEA unit. He made a lot of money by cutting and pushing low-grade heroin. The evening of April 7, 1972, Joe Gallo, who was now out of jail, went to celebrate his 43rd birthday at Umberto's Clam House in Manhattan's Little Italy. Accompanying him were his bride of 3 weeks, her 10-year-old son by a previous marriage, and Gallo's bodyguard, Peter Diopoulos. 4 men entered the restaurant and gunned down Gallo, wounding his bodyguard. Barnes had lost his guiding light, but business was booming. He no longer needed Crazy Joe. Barnes had set up a heroin production system that operated with the efficiency of a Ford assembly line. He used 20 to 30 apartments as one-night heroin processing labs, which were spread over New York City. In Sugar Hill, Elmhurst, Flatbush, Mount Vernon, and South Jamaica, to name just a few of the locales. Inside of a lab worked about 15 women, naked except for the surgical masks they wore to cover their faces and prevent them from inhaling the noxious fumes. Behind them, standing stiffly like guards at Buckingham Palace, were 3 or 4 well-armed sentries whose job it was to ensure that the night's work went smoothly. The women worked along.
So that's where New Jack City got that from, man. You know, they had the women naked with the bodyguards in there. That's where New Jack City got that from.
One long sheet of plate glass propped over pieces of furniture. Their nakedness ensured that none of them would be tempted to steal some of the valuable white powder they were spooning into glassine envelopes.
And he had a buzz naked.
The women worked steadily for 16 hours straight.
Jesus.
But it was worth it. They earned from $500 to $1,000 for their labor and were still able to make their day job, if they had one. At the end of the night's work, their employer had about 10 kilos of heroin, diluted with a variety of powders, quinine, lactose, dextrose, and a milk sugar called Bonita.
That's crazy. So they was working 16 hours. I mean, $1,000 sounds better. Hell, if you working 16 hours, how you gonna work another job? You know, 16 hours. You work. That's a job and a part-time job. You know what I'm saying? 16 hours. That's crazy. That's 2 jobs. How would you be able to? If you work 16 hours, you go home and go to bed. You work 8. You know, no, I'm sorry. That's 2 jobs. You working 16 hours. But shit, let me see, $500 a day. You got to think that's the 70s. So $500 a day. That's good money today. But no, it's not really good money today when you think about it, because you're working 16 hours, $500 a day. And I guess that is good money, I guess. But even back then, that's really good money. Anyway, man, what do y'all think about this book, man? It's interesting that they talk about how this dude Joey Gallo was friendly with the black gangsters in prison. It's interesting that they say that because, like they said in the book, Italians do not like black people, especially in the mafia. They do not like they won't, you know, having a black person in the mafia, the Italian mafia, is a no-no. And that's matter of fact, the Jewish mafia, that's a no-no. You know what I'm saying? Not to have us in their organizations. And I believe that dude Joey Gallo, I don't think he liked black people either. I just think that he was just trying to survive in prison because he had done screwed over so many people in his people in his own organization that he needed the black people in prison to protect him. So I think that he was just using it to survive. He didn't care. He didn't like black folks either. You know, they never did mention about how he probably would act after he got out. I mean, he probably kept in touch with Barnes because he was moving a lot of heroin back then. You know, to be paying your workers $500,000 a day, 15 of them, you making some bread. You know, but it always boggles my mind. And you know what thing? Another thing I like that part that he talked about how um the dude Joey Gallo pretty much put him up on game on how to run an organized crime organization and how to pretty much start your own black mafia. But us, our people, especially black men, we cannot in America. I don't know what's up. We do not. You see, you heard what they said. They said that he tried to bring it to all the other black gangsters and have a meeting and try to make this happen where they can have their own black mafia, ran organized, and they didn't want to do it. And we just I don't know what it is. What I don't know what it is with our people. We just cannot work together. We just Everybody else can work together. You got the Russian mafia. You got every kind of mafia there is. There is not a well organized black mafia because we do not know how to work together as a people. Especially the American blacks, we don't know how to work together. Then it's that jealousy. It could have been that too. Oh, who he think he is? I ain't gonna be following up on this. He trying to be the mafia. Who he think he? We ain't Italian. I ain't gonna follow him. No, I ain't. He the leader. I ain't gonna be a part. You know what I'm saying? It's that hate. It's that jealousy we have for each other. We can't work together. That's why they say it would never be a mafia. And I think, and then I remember one time, um, I had an Italian friend of mine who told me his uncles in them was part of mafia, and he said his uncle them told him, said, you know why we don't let black people into the mafia? He said they're too messy, they're not organized, and they want to flash. The mafia is all about keeping things hush hush. Black people too. Once we get some money, we're too flashy. We want to show off, and he said that's one of the reasons. He said, amongst other things, of course, when it comes to us, but he said one of the many reasons is because we're too flashy. We got to show off. We'll get a lump sum of money and buy, and be having a Cadillac in the hood, that nobody in the neighborhood can afford, not even the police officers. That's going to raise suspicion, especially when you're black back then. So he said that's one of the reasons that the mafia doesn't let black people into um, their organizations as far as organized crime. But anyway, man, what do y'all think about this Gangsters of Harlem? You can get it on Harlem. You can get it on audio on Audible. Check it out on Audible. It's called Gangsters of Harlem by Ron. I can't even pronounce. I can't even see his name. Is it Ron something? Ron Chaplin. I think his name is Chaplin. I don't know. Whatever. Gangsters of Harlem. Yeah, it's on Audible. Really good book, man. Really good book. Y'all should go check it out. But anyway, what do y'all think about this? About the organized crime, about the black and Italian relationships. Um, what do y'all think? Leave the comments and subscribe to my channel. Give me that thumbs up, man. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you. Take care.